back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys, so I am here today to talk to you about my most disappointing books of 2018. This will be a fairly quick video because actually what I've realised over time is that most of the time if I choose a book for myself, or if someone buys me a gift and they're a good friend of mine, I do like it because I know quite well what I enjoy reading. I know the styles, the ideas, the authors that I like to read. I predominantly read series, so I'm usually continuing a series. But of course, occasionally I do have books where for some reason or another they just disappoint me. Either they're not as good as the previous one in the series, or maybe it's just a case of actually they're not really very good. They're maybe a new author, self-published authors I was reading for the self-published fantasy blog off, or authors that I was reading for the BookTube SFF Awards. Something I wouldn't necessarily normally pick up. Those are the ones that I tend to find are most disappointing to me. But occasionally there are just mainstream books which I think I'm going to love and I don't. So with all that being said, let's just dive on into the books that I really wasn't a big fan of, and I'll tell you a little bit about each of them and why, but I won't go into too much detail because, to be honest, I didn't really care about these and I don't think I'd recommend them. The first book I ended up reading, but I actually DNF'd it, and that is this one, The Stormcaller by Tom Lloyd. I really wanted to love this because I've actually owned this book for ages and I really thought it would be my kind of thing. It's a book that a lot of people seem to love and a series that a lot of people seem to love. It's one that I think has been going around for quite some time. I believe this is the 10th anniversary edition, and I think the second one, or maybe the third in the series, now has a 10th anniversary, so this must be about 12, 13 years maybe old. And I don't know, I've just always seen it and thought it would be a book that I would enjoy, and when I started reading it I just found myself completely bored of the story. The characters and the world and everything about this just didn't feel that original to me, and maybe it's just a case of I've read a lot of fantasy, but I don't know if that's a good enough excuse really, because I do read a lot of fantasy, but I still find fantasy books nowadays that I love, even though I've read loads of fantasy. And this one, this just was not it. It was just not my thing at all. I really wanted to like it, but I just didn't, and unfortunately it was a bit of a disappointment. So I think I got about 25%, maybe even almost like halfway, and yeah, then I DNF'd, so that was that. Another one that I DNF'd was A Crown for Cold Silver. I don't really know exactly what it was about this one that I didn't like. I think there were a couple of different things. The characters themselves just didn't seem to click with me. This is a real issue I have with books. It can have a bad world or a bad plot, but if the characters don't work, everything else kind of relies on the characters, and I feel like that's a major disappointment if it's not working. So for me, I wasn't a big fan of seeing these characters. They just weren't my thing, and the world itself didn't feel fresh enough. It felt like there were a lot of overdone tropes being used and worked on. I think some of the characters could have been done better from what I saw of them. Again, I don't think I got that far with this one, maybe 25-ish%, something like that. So I was also trying to audiobook this, and maybe in physical form it might have been better. But for me, I just didn't like it. So yeah, again, this one was quite disappointing actually, because I think I thought I would really like this because I had a couple people tell me it was good, and it just wasn't for me. The next one I DNF'd too, and that is The Grey House. This is a book I really wanted to like. I actually got this as a gift, and it was one that I was super excited about because it sounded like it would be crazy magical realism, and it is. But it's also super, super crazy, like really out there, weird, conceptual, very much metaphorical conceptual ideas, lots of metaphysical ideas, ideas about philosophy, all being thrown into a story that is not really a story. There's a lot of different viewpoints and it's very hard to keep track of them. You never really get told exactly what's going on. You get told about people's perspectives on the moment that they're in. You don't get told what timeline they're in, whether certain story chapters fit together or not. I got to about 80% of this. I read a good chunk of this and I still did not love it.
I audiobooked it, I tried reading it, I read lots of online forums about the book where I was discussing stuff with other people. It still did not work for me. I really tried with this book, and I think this is probably my most disappointing one of the year because of everything I tried with it to try and get it to be a good read, but it just wasn't for me. I really think I struggle with overly conceptual books and books where there's not a sort of, I wouldn't say it has to be a very straightforward plot, but it needs to be a plot. And this one doesn't really have that. It just meanders around and you never quite get anywhere. And even by 80% of the book, I still had no real idea what was going on or who was who or why they were doing the things they were doing. It just wasn't working for me. So, oh well, that was another one that I DNF'd. I then want to talk a little bit about 3 books that I actually did finish, but I really found them just pretty disappointing, and that is Kin. This one is a Viking story. I love Viking stories and I thought this would be super cool. It's quite a short book. It's a murder mystery Viking story set within a family and they are trying to uncover who's done the murder. It's kind of following the main daughter of the family, who is quite a lot younger than many of her siblings, and she doesn't quite know who has done it, and she's kind of investigating a little bit. I personally think this was a bit rubbish. It really didn't do what it said it was going to do, and it didn't feel very Viking at all. It was like a contemporary version of Vikings, and I just don't think that works. I think it was certainly trying to be something that I don't think it meant to get across, or maybe I just got the wrong end of the stick when reading the blurb. But for me, it really didn't work. It was quite disappointing. The story didn't have a good payoff. It is the first in a series, but I still don't think it has a good enough payoff that I would ever want to read more by the author or the series. It just really felt a bit rubbish, to be honest, and I don't think it's one I would ever recommend to people, especially in terms of Viking stories. I'm certain there must be more out there that are better, so if you have read any really good Viking stories, please let me know, because this is the most recent one I read and it was pretty disappointing. The next one I read was Fudoki. This is a Japanese inspired story, and I really thought I might like this because I've actually read a collection of short stories by the author of this book, and I really loved the short stories. I thought the short fiction was absolutely beautiful. But unfortunately, something about Fudoki just did not work as well for me. I think maybe the longer form wasn't really appealing to this author's strengths, because the story just felt quite meandering. It felt like there was a bit of a lost cause to it. It didn't really have a pathway. It follows a couple of characters, one who's sort of recounting a story, and I think there were some sections that worked really well because they read almost like short stories within the book, but the story as a whole, it just didn't work for me. So I ended up really not thinking that was great, which is a shame, especially when you do love an author and then you read another book by them and you don't love it. I think that's often really upsetting because you're like expecting to just really love it, and I didn't with this one, so that was a shame. And then the final one I want to mention is The Killing Moon by N.K. Jemisin. This one I picked up as a buddy read quite early in the year, I think. I just didn't like it that much. I think N.K. Jemisin has currently got some excellent books out. I obviously really love the 5th season and all the Broken Earth series in general, but this book, no. This book was one of her earlier fantasy worlds and works, and I wouldn't continue the series. I just didn't think it was done very well. The writing seemed quite basic and the plotline seemed quite basic, and it just didn't work in terms of the overall premise for me. There were some really irritating things that happened, and I found myself quite irritated over fascinated, if that makes sense. Like, I didn't find I was enjoying it very much. So sadly, I gave up on the series. I did finish the book, but I gave up on the series and I was like, nah, I'm not going to read the other one because I just don't think it's for me. I will read her future fantasy because I think that everything from the Broken Earth onwards is probably going to be more my thing, because that's exactly the sort of stuff I love reading. But her older work, I've read the first book in 2 of her previous series now, and I just don't think they're great at all. So let's just hope she's like crossed over a bridge now and she's doing exactly what we all love to read. And yeah, although I do know people who love this series and love her other books, they just aren't for me. So that was that. So that's everything that was disappointing for me in 2018, or at least the ones that stand out in memory. I'd love to hear in the comments below what you guys thought of your reads. Were there any that really disappointed you? Doesn't matter if they're my favourites that disappointed you, I'd still love to know. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon in my next video. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me